Well, we're going to get started. We had hundreds of people who registered for this program tonight, and people are trickling in. So we're going to get started, and more will join us as we get into the program. Welcome to the launch for Freedom February. I'm Barbara Ransby. I'm a historian, a professor, a writer, Black feminist left activist for many years. I'm a part of the movement for Black Lives and the Rising Majority and Scholars for Social Justice. I'm a strong supporter of groups like BYP 100 and Dream Defenders, and here in Chicago, Equity and Transformation and the Black Voter Project. We have over 40 organizations that have signed up for Freedom February. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to name all of them and just give some thanks. Tonight's program is hosted by M4BL in collaboration with SSJ, Scholars for Social Justice. And we're taking this moment of reflection to really redouble our efforts to educate, agitate, and organize, to be inspired by our ancestors and to call upon all of you to do the same. We understand that we are living in a very serious moment, a very dangerous moment. But we also take heart in the fact that our people have struggled long and hard. And when I say our people, I mean it in the most capacious sense. I mean it in the largest sense possible. Freedom fighting people all over the world have resisted authoritarian dictators and fascists, and they found the courage to do that. We see an authoritarian regime taking hold here. And like all authoritarian regimes, there's a racist line of demarcation between the us and the them. We see a targeting of Black and brown people, especially Black and brown immigrants, trans people, LGBTQ people, and of course, people who have the courage to speak out, whoever they are being targeted. But there are more of us than there are of them, and that's what we have to remember in our resilience. We know that what state violence and terror looks like when we think about Black history. We know the system of chattel slavery and Jim Crow subjugation, the apartheid regime in South Africa were all authoritarian regimes. But they were all regimes that ultimately fell, and fell in large part due to the resistance of many, many people, people not unlike us, right? So in this moment, in this Black History Moment 2027, we are launching something we're calling Freedom February, and we invite all anti-fascist and freedom-loving people to join us in defense of Black history and to secure Black futures and the future of all humanity. M4BL joins with other groups in calling for a renewed commitment to the struggle for freedom and to the most honorable freedom fighting traditions in our collective histories. There will be vigils, teach-ins, forums, PMAs, that is, People's Movement Assemblies, webinars, community meetings, and protests in the street. And we hope that many of you listening tonight will join us. The panel tonight will be four amazing people. I'm going to introduce the four panelists, and the format for tonight is going to be conversational. So I'm going to introduce our four panelists, and then we're going to talk about this moment we're in. We're going to talk about the significance of Freedom February. We're going to talk about the significance of Black history as an inspiration for the struggle that we have ahead. So I'm going to begin with Adam Getachew, who is a professor of political science and race, diaspora, and indigeneity at the University of Chicago. Her work focuses on the histories of Africa and the Caribbean. She's the author of a wonderful book called World Making After Empire, The Rise and Fall of Self-Determination, and is currently working on a book on Garveyism. Her public writing has appeared in a number of publications, including Dissent, Foreign Affairs, London Review of Books, The Nation, and New York Times. And perhaps more importantly than all that, she is a longtime activist. An Ethiopian American, a former graduate student union organizer, and one of the founding members of the R3 Coalition here in Chicago, and a member of the executive committee of Scholars for Social Justice. Dale Gore is a professor of Black Studies at Georgetown University, and I've known both of these people for a long time. And she is the author of Radicalism at the Crossroads, African American Women Activists in the Cold War, co-editor of Want to Start a Revolution, yes, Radical Women in the Black Freedom Struggle. She is, the yes is not a part of the title. She is currently completing a book-length study of Black women's transnational travels and activism in the long 20th century. She has worked as an organizer on issues of police violence and supported Black feminist organizing in a number of groups and cities, including the Audre Lorde Project in Brooklyn, and is currently a member of the leadership team of Scholars for Social Justice. A third speaker is M. Adams, uses all pronouns, is a community organizer with the Movement for Black Lives, and I think co-director of the Movement for Black Lives at this point. M was born and raised in Milwaukee. She's one of our most dedicated and inspiring organizers, community organizer around issues of police violence, exploitation, and gender-based violence. They are a survivor and a prison abolitionist and a radical Black queer GNC feminist organizer. M has been a leader in Wisconsin politics and was co-executive director for a number of years for the organization Freedom, Inc. Also worked with the Take Back the Land movement and has presented before the UN Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, is co-author of a book called Forward from Ferguson and a paper on Black community control of the police in the Wisconsin Law Review. So these are folks who are both on the street and also putting out ideas and provocations for us to think deeply about these questions. Last but certainly not least is our beloved sister, colleague and comrade, Angela Y. Davis. She's a professor emerita of history of consciousness and feminist studies at UC Santa Cruz, a veteran activist, writer, and lecturer. Her work focuses on prisons, prison abolition, and the related intersections of race, gender, and class. She's the author of many books. I'm sure people are familiar with them. They include Angela Davis, an autobiography recently reissued by Haymarket Press, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and most recently her co-authored book with Gina Dent, Erica Miners, and Beth Ritchie, Abolition, Feminism Now. She's co-founder of Critical Resistance, a national organization dedicated to the dismantling of the prison industrial complex. Internationally, she is an affiliate of Sisters Inside, an abolitionist organization in Australia that works in solidarity with people in women's prisons. A brilliant movement thinker and intellectual who shows up for our movements and our people. Her name, her words, her story, her political convictions are known literally around the world. She is our bridge and connective thread to liberation movements globally and for the last half century. We honor you, we appreciate you, and we thank you for being with us here tonight, Angela. So that's our panel. And thank you to all of you for making time tonight. I know there's many things pulling us in lots of different directions. So I have a number of questions I'm going to start off with, and we're going to go from there. There will be time for questions and answers at the end. I also want to make a special thanks to Osama Kamel, who is with the M4BL staff and who's done a lot of arduous work behind the scenes to help make tonight's program possible. Let me start off with this question. There's a particular chapter of Black history and the history of this country and the world that's being written right now. And it's important that we name the moment as we form resistance strategies, as we imagine something beyond the now. So I want to ask the panel, and maybe M could speak to this, and Adam as well, and others. How do you see this moment? How is racial capitalism and empire being restructured in this moment? And what do we take from that understanding in terms of our own strategies for action and organizing?
I'm happy to start. First, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be starting Black History Month with all of you. And with the intention always of being in community and in struggle with each other. So I want to speak especially to the question of how to think about empire right now, because I think there is a challenge in the wider discourse between two different framings of how to think about the moment. One is a kind of liberal framing that Trump is unprecedented. So after the kidnapping of Maduro, there was a shocking headlines in the New York Times, which basically said, the country that has stood on behalf of freedom for all the world engaged in this horrible, crazy action of kidnapping a, national leader. And then I think the flip side of that kind of emphasis on rupture, on unprecedented character, is a sort of story that says, America's been an empire all the time and it's the same old story all the time. So I think we need to develop a much more nuanced analysis about what is continuous and what is new in the current moment, or and what are returns of things that we thought we had also, left behind a century ago, basically. So I think one thing I want to say is that I do think it in the kind of since the end of World War II, one of the things that feels very unprecedented about this moment of imperial expansion and the threats on Venezuela, on Greenland, on the bombings of Nigeria, etc., is there is no longer a liberal discourse of empire that says we stand for liberalism, for human rights, for democracy. It is entirely a nationalist discourse that says we are about protecting our resources, our people, always identified in racial terms. So I think that is a difference, and it makes a difference for how we engage the question of empire. The second thing I would say is that in terms of thinking about continuity, I think we have to tell a story about how the last 25 years of the war on terror has produced particular dynamics in US empire. Um, uh, Immigration customs enforcement is a relatively new institutional form. It dates to the war on terror, to the formation of the Department of Homeland Security. It's not to say we didn't have border control before, right? But this idea of basically like an army that it operates as if it's a domestic police force, that basically treats the the domestic territory as if it is a site of war, dates back to this kind of the last 20 years. And I think we should be very clear about how the war on terror, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the formation of a Department of Homeland Security has really led us to this particular moment. The third last thing I'll say is that I think we also see forms of empire that look like 19th century forms of imperialism coming back. And this is to do with the just blatant sort of extractionism, right? We're just going to commandeer Venezuela's oil. We're going to commandeer the resources of Greenland. And again, that kind of outright blatant resource imperialism was one that I think had the space for it had been quite limited in the 20th century, in part because of the victories of anti-colonialism, and it is now returned. So I say that to say because I think especially on the left, you know, the critical posture of like America has always been an empire is important, but only telling a story of continuity really minimizes the moments where anti-imperialism won important victories. And so if we're going to be able to defeat kind of the forces of American empire in the present, we have to know how we won before.
Great, great, great. Yeah. Sort of rupture and continuity and reminding us to not accept simplistic explanations for this moment we're in, right? I mean, that's really important. You want to weigh in on how you see this moment?
Yeah, and gratitude and appreciation for being able to be on this panel tonight. I look forward to learning a lot. So thanks a lot for having me. One of the things that I think is really important for us to do as freedom-loving people is to be able to be exacting about the type of crises in which we're facing. And so for Black folks, because that's where I spend the majority of my time organizing with Black people, there's always this sort of question of, well, how bad is it really? It's always been really bad. So I'm going to spend a little time with that idea here for a second. So the question about, well, what is the state of capitalism? What is happening with gendered racial capitalism? There's always been crises caused to our community, on our bodies, on our communities, on the earth by gendered racial capitalism. That has always been the case, right? That we've been in a perpetual cyclical crisis, right? And Black folks, we know that story very, very well. And so that's true. And there are other types of crises that we also have to pay attention to, like structural crises, which is when capitalism can't remedy itself simply just by extracting more off of a Black body, that there has to be some structural intervention into capitalism. And that happened in 2008 when the banks were going to be, when the banks were doing all of this terrible stuff, hurting and harming our communities, and they couldn't resolve it themselves. The government had to step in. We're now in a type of crisis, I think, that others think as well, called a systemic crisis, which is where the system may not be able to repair. And that's important to know, not because we're interested in saving capitalism. I want to be really clear about that. We are against capitalism. We have to be against capitalism. But what comes after that might not necessarily be good unless we, as Black folks, as freedom loving folks, as the left, are prepared to create and usher in the new world. And so I want to be clear that right now, the big threat as well as opportunity is that we could be facing an ending to gendered racial capitalism as currently arranged. And that could mean new accumulation models. So new ways in which labor is organized, new and or different ways in which the earth is extracted from, new and or different ways in terms of how we understand our social identities and how people are arranged across nation states or non-nation states, et cetera. That's really important because that new ushering in of that thing by the far right is happening through war, it's happening through empire, it's happening through extreme exploitation, and a set of other things. And so we have to be able to be clear about what this particular moment means so we take seriously our task to meet the moment and usher in the new world. And so this is a time of revolution, just to put it very plainly. And I don't mean that in romantic and or dramatic sense. I mean that from a very calculated stance, is that the negotiations of how the broad macroeconomies work, the negotiations around how government will be run, the negotiations around who gets to be in power, tech billionaires and or a government, is being called to question. And that is, in fact, the terms of revolution. And we just have to be the ones who have the power and the positioning to answer what comes next.
Laying out a lot, laying out a lot. This theme of rupture, Adam's reminding us that this is not the old face of liberal empire. We're saving the world. It's like we're out to get cash. This is what, the kleptocrats and the grifters that are in power now are taking the mask off and kind of unapologetically pursuing an imperialist agenda after, of course, saying that they had no intention of doing that. And M is pushing us to think about a real rupture in terms of the flow of capital and the governing regime of racial gender capitalism. That the mask is off, and this may be both, as Gramsci said, in times of disruption, the time of monsters. Um, a lot's been laid out. We have some more questions to pursue. Deo and Angela, do you want to jump in, or you should we kind of expand the scope of the conversation a little bit from this question? The latter. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know everybody has a lot to say about this moment, and at the same time, at least I speak for myself, I feel overwhelmed every day. As we try to figure it out. But we've been talking about historical ruptures and continuities. And Deo, you write about radical Black women in the Cold War, radical Black women who resisted imperialism under very dire circumstances of repression, anti-communism, and so forth. And can you offer us something, some lessons, some insights, and just parenthetically to say to folks, I say this all the time: history does not repeat. So we're not talking about blueprints from the past, and we're not talking about a rehash of the past. But the fact that certain things have happened in the past offers insights and lessons as to where we are now. So just that as a little historical disclaimer from the historians. But Dale, talk a little bit about your work and what it brings forth for you in this moment.
Sure, I love to. And I just want to thank you, Barbara, for inviting me, for folks pulling this together. This is one of the best ways I've started Black History Month. And as a scholar of Black history, let me just tell you, it can go south pretty easily for a ride. But I'm excited to be here among community, among people thinking both about our history and our future, how we move forward collectively. I hear M's call to claim this revolution, right? This potential in this moment. And I really just take very seriously this idea of the continuity and newness, and how that is really a challenge for us as we move forward. Like the challenges to some of the things that we're used to negotiating. Liberal democracy is one, right, which is a facade for some of the things that have already that are happening now without that facade. And so, how do you negotiate that, and how do you work through that? It keeps me thinking a lot. But I also hold on to some of the lessons I get from studying these women who were radicalized in the 1930s and became key leadership in Black left, a lot of them in the Communist Party, but not all of them. And during the 40s and 50s, at the height of the Cold War, what people call McCarthyism or anti-communism, where the government sort of declared a war against the left in the US and the left broadly, even though they framed it as anti-communism. History shows that it was an attack on a broad array of people, and particularly queer folks, and particularly the Black liberation struggle came under intense surveillance and attack in the US during this period. And I think about one of the writers I follow, Beulah Richardson, who did poetry in support of the movement. And she has this one line in a poem that I often quote. The poem is called Genocide, and she talks about history as changing but unchanged. Right, this American democracy, it kills me in ways that are changing but unchanged, and that reminds me a lot that history is important, but history is not a roadmap. Right, we have to use it as a tool and as a way to build strategy, but it won't tell us where we're going. Right. Um, I also think about the ways in which they approach Black History Month. And during that period, it was called Negro History Week, which has started, folks probably know, in 1926. But during the 50s, the Communist Party would put out these weekly sort of um, publications about Black History Week during the year. And um, they're really interesting. One of them was carried on the cover a picture of Frederick Douglass, and then a lot of the activists who were active today, and it was talking about the ghost of Frederick Douglass haunting us in this moment. A very powerful painting by Charles White, who was a Black artist and activist at the time. And another one that they put out in 1953 was all included pictures from Claudia Jones, who was one of the highest ranking Black women in the Communist Party, an immigrant who was deported in the midst of this Red Scare for her political convictions. But it was a sort of ode to Black women, the work of Black women in helping to continue the struggle and sort of their indispensability in the movement. Um, and I take from that work that they do, sort of these signs of how they continued even in the midst of some of their leaders being under severe attack, as a real important lesson that they provide for us. And one of the things I think about, so the Black women I study often were coming up in leadership in the midst of this sort of attack on them, and they stood firm to this in many ways. Not that they didn't suffer from it. Many of them lost their jobs. Most of the organizations they had originally started organizing in came under attack, sort of like the National Negro Congress. Many of their unions, many of them came through organizing and union work and were union leadership, and they were kicked out of those unions. But what they did was they created other spaces. They made other organizations. Some of that was in negotiation with the politics and policies of the Communist Party. But if you look at the 1950s, one of the interesting things you see is a number of Black left organizations that probably still have resonance with us today. Freedom Newspaper, which was led by Paul Robeson, the Civil Rights Congress, which had put out the We Charge Genocide petition in 1951. The Sojourners for Truth and Justice, who in the last maybe 10 years have gotten their attention for being one of the first sort of radical Black women-led civil rights organizations. The National Negro Labor Council, which Vicki Garvin, who's one of my figures that I actually encountered while coming up and was active in this period, was a key leadership in it. All of those organizations were formed in the 1950s. Most of them the earliest in 1948, the last one in 1951. They didn't last long, maybe 4 to 5 years, but you could see in those spaces something different happening, right? It's not just that they moved their work to new places, but they revisioned their work. And particularly for the women, they thought about how they could claim more space for leadership, how they could articulate theories that talk not just about race and class and pluralism, but also gender in that, how they could really push the Communist Party to think more centrally about what we call today an intersectional analysis, how they could push the parties to think more seriously about a Black internationalism that was sort of anti-colonial and challenged white supremacy. And we could see it in some of the work they do. Like the We Charge Genocide petition really boldly centers a claim for sort of a black folks in the US as part of an international community, and the US as a need to be held to account for how they treat them, right? Just as the US claimed it could do that for other countries, right? We could see it in the National Legal Labor Council that really championed itself not as a movement around workers unnamed, but as a movement that was for Black women and men, and that it had room in that movement for folks, right? For women to have leadership as well, explicitly in their opening convention, they put that out there explicitly. And so, in part, I think some of the strategies they take up about operating in multiple spaces, but recreating new organizations that also revision their politics, right? That aren't just about mourning what gets lost, but thinking about how we build something that might speak to where we want to go, right? That builds broader than that. And I can say more about that, but I'll leave with this last thing. The other thing that really struck me about their work that I carry with me is one, they were committed to a life of struggle, to what Vicki Garvin often called the protracted struggle. So they saw their role not as a victory in their lifetime, but as a part of building a movement. And one of the things when Vicki Garvin, she had been working as a labor organizer most of her life, had lost her union job, went to the National Negro Labor Council, and then and then that had to close. They were being threatened to name names and give people up to the government to come under surveillance. And she said she decided that she would leave and they would close down the organization. And one of the things that she recognized is that this was a protracted struggle, that she would continue. And part of the work she had done as she looked across her labor was to make possible the civil rights movement. So one of the last things the National Negro Labor Council did was they gave an award to Rosa Parks for her protest and sitting down, right? And that she saw the ways in which their work was continuing. And she would go to Ghana to continue work. She would go to China. They would find other places to continue this struggle and grow it. And I think that's one of the big other lessons I carried with them, and that they were friends in that struggle,
Yeah.
right? That they were comrades and they learned to negotiate political differences, but remain connected. I'll stop there because I could go. I have a book, so I could go on for a long time.
Everybody should read Dale's book, tells a story, and I see Angela nodding while you're talking.
Mm,
Of course, this is very much a political lineage and community of which she was a part. And I think, when you talk about repression, we think of McCarthyism, in the 40s and 50s, and well, McCarthy died. It's a misnomer, but we call it McCarthyism, the period of anti-communist repression in the mid 20th century, and then into the 60s and 70s, COINTELPRO surveillance and repression, and how people responded with imperfect people, right? And people who had fears and everything, but responded with trust and principle in the best case scenarios, right? And I think, Angela, I'm thinking of Dorothy Burnham now, of the long sojourn. She's in 100 and something, 100 and she's in her hundreds, and she's somebody who has kind of maintained faithfully, a commitment to justice all these years, passed on to her children, shared that commitment with her husband of many years, and so forth. But it was that relationship of trust, of also not naming names, of not collaborating with authoritarianism and fascism. And that's the test of this generation too, is what does it mean to not collaborate? What does
Mm.
it mean to, find the courage to say no and to reject the intimidation that inevitably comes.
Yeah, Dorothy actually is a super centenarian, which means that she is 110, going on 111.
It's
She'll be
amazing,
111 in a couple of months,
amazing, amazing.
and she represents that long road. We talk about the long Black liberation movement, and she in many ways incorporates that because she's experienced so many different moments. And well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation. Um, I've learned so much from all of you and from your work, and to tell the truth, I agreed to come on the conversation, not because I thought I had anything important to say, but because I thought I would learn more from all of you. But can I say just a few words about something I've been thinking about for a while, Barbara? Because this is a very difficult moment, and uh, when we watch what's happening with ICE, and we think about Hitler's brown shirts. Uh, it's uh, it's so much more than encroaching fascism. It's we see um, the evidence of efforts to completely destroy everything um, working people, progressive people, Black people have been struggling for hundreds of years. Um, but I think I want to say that while it's so important for us to attempt to grasp what's going on at this moment, and as Adam and Em were pointing out, the devastating structural changes that are also happening. Um, I sometimes I think it's important to try to um, understand that which is not going to be claimed by this authoritarianism and this fascism. Um, Oftentimes, I think we sell ourselves short, and Deo was talking about the lessons we can learn from all of these amazing Black women who've struggled over time, and uh, while we always have to find ways of generating the hope that will keep us fighting. I think sometimes we miss the consequences of the work that we've done by focusing uh, too hard on the horrors, and um, because this is a period during which we've experienced so many moments in which uh, political developments that a lot of us have struggled for a long time came to fruition. I'm thinking about the consciousness around Palestine, and how many decades and decades we had to wait before we saw uh, grassroots efforts to challenge the state of Israel. That's something that's really exciting, and I think we need to hold on to that. And I was, I was just before this Zoom, I was listening to the testimony that the brothers of Renee Good gave in Washington earlier today, and they was just so moving. And they spoke our language, and I think sometimes we sell ourselves short in terms of the impact that our movements have had on everyday people. And because we do that, we don't know how to claim the victories that we've won, even when we are under attack as we are now. Uh, so that's just something that I would like to throw out there. That let's remember that all of this is happening because the left was moving forward. This is all a reaction, and if we maintain a vision of where we're headed, and see ourselves not as being the ones who are always under attack, which we are, of course, but to see that we've had some agency and that we've brought about some change, and that all of that is not going to be swept away in a moment. It's enduring, and we have something to build on.
A lot of heart emojis and
Mhm.
positive reactions to what you're saying. I think that's true. Um, it is a fierce backlash, if you will, against what was in many ways on many fronts around Palestine liberation, around LGBTQ issues and forward-looking um, politics of gender and sexuality, around climate, the climate movement growing from a movement that focused on saving, trees and you know, the atmosphere, protecting the atmosphere, to a movement that said, we're not talking about climate change, we're talking about systems change. The immigrant justice movement going from immigrant rights movement to immigrant justice movement and saying we know that it's not citizenship that will save us because we see the Black movement. And of course, in Minneapolis, this fierce mass response in Minneapolis is also the place where you saw, tens of thousands of people, overwhelmingly white people,
Yep.
interestingly, respond in an anti-racist uprising against the George Floyd murder 6 years ago. So these threads are as important, as the violent response. And, some people said these murders, the Renee Good murder and the Alex Preddy murder and the murder of a number of brown immigrant folks whose names have not gotten as much attention, and of course the ongoing police violence in our communities, in some ways that can quell a movement. People back off, as Deo said, in McCarthyism, people said name names or there's consequences. But I think we see a redoubling, we see a growing, we see more people taking more actions, in our communities. And not to say it's smooth sailing, my people. I'm not saying that, but to say we are not done. And no defeat is absolute, no victory is absolute, but we are not done. There is a dialectical relationship between this repression and our movements and traditions of resistance. So you anticipated my next question, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on this. My question to you was, as someone who, I claim you as a historian, I know your training is as a philosopher, but you're my historian. Um, but also have lived through and been an agent of change in different historical periods. Are there any periods or people in particular historical circumstances that come to mind to you in this moment, as we think of learning lessons from history? I mean, you've given us a little bit of that already.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate Deo's insistence on the role that Black women have played, and during the McCarthy era, during the 50s, 60s. But I would, you know, I was also thinking of V. Richards and her that long, beautiful poem of what is it called? I Am a Black Woman. Uh,
Yeah.
Black woman.
yeah, about a Black woman speaks. Yes, that was it. Yeah, yeah. So there is so much that we have to draw from, and I think this is Black History Month. This is the Black History Month that we know those in Washington are trying to eradicate. Uh, but I, I want to really thank MVL for emphasizing this. We can't, Black History Month has provided us sustenance. I can remember as a young girl when attending a segregated school, elementary school in Birmingham, how I always looked forward to not Black History Week. It was Negro History Week. I always look forward to Negro History Week because that was a week we got to think about, all of those who had struggled for us and were modeling for us. So, yeah. And Black History Week, because Frederick Douglass's birthday, or the birthday he chose, Valentine's Day, which is significant also, and who was it? Abraham Lincoln's birthday, all
Mm,
fell within that week.
mm,
Now, uh, we know Abraham Lincoln was not responsible for the, liberatory trajectory that we celebrate. But I mean, I guess it's okay. Abraham Lincoln was the president when slavery was at least in law abolished. So yeah, I think that we do everything we can to uh, not only hold on to Black History Month, but give it the kind of radical thrust that we need in order to move along this revolutionary trajectory.
mm.
So, yeah, I think that history. I mean, Barbara, you're the historian. Adam, you're a historian.
Dale too.
And
M too,
Dale's
really.
yeah, this is a panel full of historians, and then him and me. um, so, um, history is also how we live, and it's also our consciousness. It's our awareness of who we are. And Black History Month is so absolutely central for everybody who loves freedom, uh, because it's an extraordinary story of a people who absolutely refused to capitulate and who found ways to pass that message on from generation to generation. I mean, when you think about it, it's really a miracle that almost 500 years later, Black people still experience this impulse to struggle for freedom. And so that is that if whatever kind of democracy we might say exists in the US, that is the only reason why we have this democratic tradition. So it's I think it's so great that M4BL is doing this Freedom February and encouraging people, all over the world to celebrate Black history, um, not so much only for Black people, but for Palestinians and for people in the Congo and for people in Haiti and for all people who believe in the struggle for freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm teaching a Black Studies class now after not having done so for a while, and I'm teaching it to 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. And so, the kind of wonder of, resilience, creativity in different forms of resistance. I mean, all that is a part of the legacy and the legacy that we draw on now. I wanted to ask us, I'm reminded in these times of that quote from King, the fierce urgency of now. And as much as we talk about the history, as rich as the history is, as complex as the history is, um, I want to bring us back also to this fierce urgency of now to talk about a little bit more about the terrain of struggle. A number of us here, M has been a strategist in movement in different spaces for, when I say a long time, a long time considering your tender age, my friend. But but for a while now in different contexts and is really looked to as someone who offers analysis and strategy together. And then I know the others of us have spent our working lives on college campuses and are now looking at the erosion of, and Angela spoke so eloquently about Black history, the erosion of access to, the university and colleges to Black students, but also the attacks on curricula, the attack on critical race studies, attack on DEI. And DEI was never something that we created, but the attack on it is a racist attack. And the erasure of, I think even part of the exhibit on you at the African American Smithsonian Museum, Angela, they either tried to take down or took down. So this attack on Black history, literally, not just a debate, but literally whitewashing of history, has significance and brings us back to this question of fierce urgency of now. So, in light of this discussion about Black history, where are we in terms of the fronts of struggle that exist now as we talk about the historical legacy of Black struggle? We can start on the campuses and wander off of the campuses. I know SSJ, Adam, Deo, and I, spend a lot of time with scholars for social justice trying to think about this. Um, there's the labor front, there's the mutual aid front, there's the culture front. Angela Davis and Gina Dent were part of this visualizing abolition project in Santa Cruz, which is bringing people's imagination into seeing beyond prisons as a way, as a form of political engagement. Because sometimes we fight harder when we can see something beyond what we're fighting against. Um, anyway, I'm answering my own questions as I'm asking more. But fierce urgency of now, terrains of struggle. Deo, Adam, you want to kick us off, and then we can go to Em and Angela.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Maybe I'll just raise another terrain or strategy of struggle, which is, I think, internationalism,
Yes,
which has
yes, please.
long been part of a kind of Black radical tradition, as Deo was talking about. And I should say, from a more autobiographical note, that I'm an immigrant to this country. I came at the age of 13, a month after September 11th, 2001, at the height of a kind of nationalist militarism. And that is the context in which I was encountered Black History and Black History Month and in high school, right? And I remember my guidance counselors here actually, and one of the things we did in this organization called the African American Awareness Society is put on a play about the Harlem Renaissance for us and it was just an incredible learning lesson. But I bring that up because in some ways it was really through an encounter with Black studies that I learned about the places I came from in a different way and had a more politicized and radical understanding of Ethiopia and the African continent. So I just want to say internationalism has always been a central part of the Black radical tradition. I think internationalism is most effective when we're able to connect our local struggles with struggles elsewhere. And there are very important and salient places of contact and connection. The movement for Black Lives has been central in exposing those forms of contact and connection, say between police forces in the United States and the IDF, right, as one site of like very concrete connection where we can fight. We're fighting on two terrains at the same time, like a very specific local fight and also an international fight. So I think we should think about internationalism not only as something we do in solidarity with others, certainly should think about that, but also as really central to our own struggles here and identify those moments of contact, connection, and leverage that point both to the domestic and to the international simultaneously.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Adam. It makes me think about the ways in which, even in our analysis, we have to think internationally because part of what is happening here is about this reshifting of global capitalism, right? And sort of the remaking of the landscape and what it means for U.S. markets, labor, bodies, people in this moment. And so interconnected. I really value that. Um, I guess I'll try to talk a little bit more about the university, because I do think one of the things I take from my work, thinking about the long history of Black radicalism, is that education, study, struggle have always been connected, and they've always been a key part of any movement, right? That the building of sort of spaces where people learn, explore, produce knowledge, share knowledge, is and disseminate knowledge, I think, and perspectives and strategies is so crucial. And I want to take to heart, part of what this moment is about the productive ways, the really successful ways movements have been able to do that. I would have never thought that I would hear newscasters talk about abolition and not talk about the 1860s or 1850s, right? Or use the word white supremacy, right? And in their regular news. So I do think, and as Professor Davis and Ramsey spoke to some of the ways in which we see our movements. Our students who think about I teaching students now, they already have a secondhand knowledge of some of the things I'm talking about. So I think it has been a real uh, it's speaking to sort of the backlash, I think, to some of the successes we've had. But clearly, I think I would also say that some of those successes have been particularly through the university model, a little isolated. And we haven't had ways of sustaining it on our own. And I think that's one of the challenges that we talk about in SSJ. How do we, if the university is a part of the crumbling of the liberal democracy, it's crumbling too, then how do we then build other spaces where we can continue this work and have spaces to connect with the community, and continue sort of this important work of knowledge production? Because I think for me, the attacks the university is facing from DEI, I mean, the long-standing labor attacks that have been going on and been the adjunct, the moving out of full-time employees, the speed up of work in the university have been happening for decades, right? And I think partly what we're challenged with is this moment that makes it uh, more explicit and also ties it, I think, more centrally to a project of white supremacist Christian nationalism, heteropatriarchy, right? These structures that are explicit about the ways in which it's a challenge and an attack on certain bodies that they see as not belong. And how quick, I think the question gets raised, the university is willing to jettison some of those bodies. We saw that, I think, in some of the university responses to the war in Palestine. We see it in the university's responses to DEI, right? That in part they're willing, and I will be the first to say, as someone who was in the system and had to negotiate DEI, we needed something different, but this is not, that attack is about them jettisoning certain bodies and saying these brown, these queer, people that are on margins aren't useful in the university. We can get rid of them, we can silence them. And I think one of the ways that it's important to challenge that is to think differently about what universities or what kind of educational structures we want. I think another important way that we have to think about challenging those is understanding the connections that are happening between the challenges in the university and the challenges in K to 12, because those attacks are really have been intense and are really remaking and have been remaking K through 12 education for a while. And I think about some of the work like the Zen Project does around trying and teachers education around trying to sort of challenge those. But to me, I think the university has to be more attuned to that. I think we watched those happen because they were going on for a while. And we didn't have a response. We didn't realize that it would be coming to the university soon. And it is here now. Like, I know people struggle with what to teach. I know in Black studies, we worry about when we will come under attack. But I also then take heart from the history of Black folks and Black historians and Black scholars who have learned to produce knowledge in multiple spaces, who have learned to create other places that challenge the university, right? And I think that is one of the tasks we have, not to give up the fight for the university. I work there, that it is a workplace, and I think is a part of the labor struggle, as well as a place where we can think about creating resources for our communities. But I do think we have to also begin to think about other ways of producing knowledge that aren't tied or beholden to the university per se.
Like the Open
Awesome.
University. Yeah, SSD is the
Yes.
program you call Open University. And part of Freedom February, and can say also, is to there are other programs coming up throughout the month. There's these 40 organizations that are going to host various kinds of programs. Is to learn and grow and struggle together in using Black History Month as a sacred time to do that work. Em, you want to say anything about the work InfraBL is doing? I know there's been a lot of discussion about this moment of increased state violence and repression and the need for what, for lack of a better term, mutual aid, but also, I think what Dale talked about in terms of relationship building in times of hardship and times of danger is also part of what sustained people and sustained movement. So I don't know if you want to speak to that
Yeah.
or anything else.
Yeah. I mean, oh, there's so much. And I got all these pieces of notes here from the very brilliant insight laid out by the panelists. I'll start by offering a provocation, right? So when Asada Shakur transitioned, I began to reread her autobiography. And I began to read it with my son, who is 15 years old. And in our most recent discussion around the latest chapters of the book, we kept discussing what it meant to be a revolutionary. And what she impresses upon us, and why I think it is such an urgent text to your question earlier, Barbara, about the urgency of now, is what I think she's impressing upon us is that to be a revolutionary is to see yourself as both accountable and responsible. And as she names it, waging war against empire, right? But is that it is your job, it is your role, it is your duty to wage war against the empire. And so I want to ground us all in that before I continue the other parts of my remarks, because what I would like to evoke, or what I hope people leave this call with, is understanding that it is all of our jobs to become historical actors, right? It is great to be a historian. I love historians. You all are some of my favorite people, right? To learn and to understand what happened, but to do that with the goal of affecting what is to come. So all of our responsibilities are to become historical actors, people who take on the responsibility of directing the future or directing what is to come beyond this moment. There are several terrains of struggle because our enemy is very sophisticated and being able to attack us across many different facets. So the points that Adam was raising earlier around us being clear around our internationalism and our internationalist politics is extremely important because the enemy is a global enemy, right? Elon Musk has no borders in his destruction, in his harm, in his advancement of white supremacy, gendered racial capitalism, cis heteropatriarchy. And neither does Trump, right? And neither does many of these other far right forces, right? They know no borders when it comes to the kind of destruction that they intend for us. There's also there are many different fronts in which I can name. I want to uplift the kinds of struggles in particular that many trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary, intersex folks have been fighting back against empire, as recognizing, right, the ways in which this particular empire is trying to dominate our body and reorder social reproduction, first beginning with the erasure of people who are trans and non-binary and intersex, right? There are many different facets is what I'm trying to illustrate. And without exhausting the list of all the different ways or all the different fronts in which we need to be prepared to fight, I want to offer a few different areas in which if we build, I think we could address a great many of those, right? Because that's what Black feminism teaches us, right? To think both intersectionally and interconnected and how the struggles can be fought. One of them in which I want to bring up is one of the great contradictions of this moment in terms of the way that capital is being rearranged is that of the limit of the material resource of the earth, right? So they're trying to build data centers, they're trying to build online platforms. Some people are theorizing that the next evolution of the economic system, of the political economic system, would be techno-feudalist or some version of that. The contradiction of that system, the limit of that system is the earth, right? Is the actual minerals, the land, where are these things built? who are the bodies that are going to be used to build them, what water systems are used, etc. That is an area that we have to actually take serious, right? Because we have to actually prepare ourselves to defend ourselves, not an abstraction, but like where you live on a physical place, connected to resources, connected to food systems, connected to natural resources. And the other piece that's key in that is we have to contest for our human infrastructure. We live in a particular time, and I, want to give a lot of credit to Tanya Lee, who's a Black leftist feminist organizer and thinker, who talks about the ways in which a lot of our infrastructure has really been withered away over the last decades, both because of the demolition of the welfare state, whether it be COVID, technology, all these different things that have really eroded the ways in which human beings gather, convene, and are with one another, right? So, how many folks know their neighbors? How many folks know people's kids? How many folks live in a place long enough to actually build a community, without being moved away from gentrification and a host of other things? I mention these two areas because not only do I think if we wage a struggle on those two areas, will they help us fight the other facets, but I actually think that's where our power can be leveraged. We're not going to out capital the billionaires. We're not going to out money them. Though I do think it's really important that we begin to imagine and be in sort of a prefigurative practice around other economic modalities. But we're not going to out capital them, right? But what we can do is out people them. And that is the power of organizing. That is the power of organization. The ability to engage people around their lived experience, the ability to help people understand how their individual suffering is connected to the structural issues, and helping people gain the skill to do something about it. That is what I think our primary terrain of struggle is. And if we do that, I do very much believe we can build a movement powerful enough to wage struggle on a wide range of issues. So the ways that M4BL is approaching that, I want to point to two active projects. One is a strategy called community care networks. So this is where we've identified places with folks on the ground who are members of M4BL where the fascists have advanced either through their deployment of the National Guard or their deployment of ICE. And we're working with folks in those communities to help engage and create mutual aid projects where they're engaging people and taking action to meet their own needs, but also politicizing folks, right? Educating people about the systems and helping equip people with tools and organizing strategies to actually combat the things that they're experiencing. And we think that that strategy is really important because we need to create on ramps for masses of people to join the movement. We need to create on ramps for many, many folks to get involved and to take action and to organize. Because right now, people are feeling isolated, they're feeling concerned, and we have to give people opportunities to do something. And we have to also lead and inspire hope. And so, community care networks is a key strategy that we're leading. The other thing is that we're engaged in creating several different broad front strategies. That's when we're trying to engage as many different people as possible to be willing to take on this fight to fight authoritarianism. So these may not always be people we agree with on everything. These may not be people we organize with in creating this shared vision for the world we want forward. These may be people we're oppositional with on other things. But we are sharing an experience right now where, hey, authoritarianism is actually hurting many of us. And in order to struggle around the things we want to struggle around, we have to defeat authoritarianism. So we're creating many different opportunities using these community care networks where organizations on the ground are engaged with other organizations in their area that they may not work with. And we're also creating those opportunities nationally. So those are a couple practical, everyday ways in which we're inviting folks to get involved and organize.
Thank you, Em. Um, we're due to go until 6:30, but I think I had invited, Adam has a young child who is who has a different schedule planned for this evening. So Adam, I know you have to leave us, but we want to thank you. We're going to segue in a couple of minutes to Q&A, and then wrap up in about 15 minutes. But thank you for being with us and for all the work you do and your wonderful scholarship too. Um, so we are right about 6:15. If either Dale or Angela had any follow-up comments, have those now. I wanted to ask each person before we close after the Q&A. We'll take about 3 or 4 questions. What is your source of optimism? And I think each of you have already, and I was taking notes because I'm collecting all the optimism I can. Some things have already been said, but if we wanted to have a closing comment about optimism after the Q&A. So we take about, do about 10 minutes of Q&A and then we will close it out. Does that work for everybody? Thank you. Okay, I've been given some questions here that came through Osama. And one was about labor. We haven't talked a lot about labor, but there was the general strike in Minneapolis, 1 day strike, and there's talks of another general strike. I know here in Chicago we have the labor leadership around May Day that's come out of CTU and other unions. What do you all think about this question of the importance of labor weighing in this moment? I know, when the nurses union and the VA workers had demonstrations all over the country when Preddy was killed. Um, Thoughts about labor, organized labor in this moment?
Well, I don't think we can underestimate the power of labor, even under the changed economic structures that we are experiencing. I, you know, one of the reasons I think we're we're in this political morass has to do with the fact that the Democratic Party failed absolutely to acknowledge the power of labor, and as a consequence, helped to make some sectors of labor more conservative. Um, but at the same time, there's still some very exciting things happening. And when we think about the recent organizing around Amazon and Starbucks, I live in Oakland, and without the ILWU Local 10, we wouldn't be thinking about these movements in the way we did, because they were the first. They were the first to refuse to unload ships from South Africa and helped to launch the anti-apartheid movement here. The ILWU also refused to unload ships from Israel, and although they aren't the force that they used to be, they're still doing really important work in the Palestine Solidarity Movement and so many other movements. So I don't think we can underestimate the power of labor. Like you said, it was really exciting to see the nurses respond to Alex Preddy's um, killing in all over the country, and the nurses union have been in the forefront of the anti-Trump campaign. What is it called, the No Kings movement, and so forth. So yeah, I don't think we can underestimate labor, but at the same time, I think we need to take note of the way labor itself has structurally transformed. So supporting labor today does not mean what it meant 50 years ago. We're talking about women. We're talking about women in the global South. We're talking about the care industry. We're talking about new industries that have developed. So I think that has to be incorporated into our analysis and into our strategies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But can I just say one other thing? Because if I don't
Of
say it
course.
now, then I'll probably forget to say it. We don't have very much. I just wanted to say something in response to M's insistence on um, um, figuring out, how to support neighborhoods and humans, people.
Mhm.
I just want to say, I think we need to go beyond humans. Uh, because humanism has been at the center of so much damage to the rest of the world that's not necessarily human. So I think we need to figure out how to incorporate into our analysis and understanding of the damage that has been done to other living beings on this planet, and 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 we can't be so human focused that we forget that we are who we are as humans only in community with other living beings, both plant and animal life.
Mhm.
And I think especially now we have to start incorporating that into our analysis, because our enemies are don't give a damn about the earth. They don't give a damn about the rest of the universe. So I think that freedom is freedom never works if it's only confined to a specific sector. Freedom only exists insofar as it can be as expansive as possible. And I just want to put that insight out as we move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, M has talked about this idea of empire, ecology, and economics as being a part of the sort of crisis of capitalism in this moment. And my own kind of formula, very similar to that, is climate, big tech, and financialization are destabilizing features of capitalism in this moment. But shared between both of those is this question of climate, and this climate justice movement says, and indigenous folks remind us, you can't have an infinite growth economy on a finite planet. And that is a contradiction. You were talking about whether this crisis of capitalism, whether it can self-correct again, whether it can adapt. And that is the wall that it keeps coming up against, to Angela's point about our analysis and our strategies have to be beyond just human beings. And that's a lesson for the left too, because it's the traditional left, if you will, if there is such a thing, um, had not factored in climate. The idea of constant production and more, was a question of who owns the means of production, not rethinking this constant growth strategy that is destroying the planet. Of course, it was a different time when many of those folks were theorizing.
And let me just say, it's also about the enormous violence that is inflicted on animals
Yeah.
for the purpose of capitalist production of food. That ends up hurting more people than it helps.
Yeah.
So, you know,
That's part of why you're
And
vegan, right?
well, yeah, I mean, but of course, one person, 20 people being vegan isn't going to solve the problem, but it is connected
It is
in a
connected.
moral sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if I can just say one thing, that
Yep.
I think it also speaks really to our how we think about labor, because I think part of the moment we're in, where people are craving sort of resources and security that lead them to things like signing up for the military to get citizenship, joining ICE because it's a payment, emphasizing sort of unionization that is exclusive instead of inclusive because of fear of losing that, right? That I think that articulation of the cost of certain jobs and work needs to be more a part of our labor organizing. I don't think we talk enough about all, you know, not all work is equal work, and some of the cost you have to think more long term about. And I think about this sort of idea that how the labor unions think about sort of uh, international sort of exploitation, how the exchange operates in transnational trade, and what the implications are for that, right? And what that means for places like the global South. This idea that people will join the AI move because it will allow them to have more jobs, not thinking about the long-term consequences of that, right? And I think that very much, I'll just speak from the university, also happens in the university, where faculty might valorize being tenured without thinking really deeply about how much of our labor, our tenure is upheld by exploiting non-tenured casual labor and also staff. And so I just think we have to have a much more integrated idea about how we, as workers, or we think about building labor sort of communities, because that isolated vision of one job, or organizing through your union, I think is much more complicated in this moment of scarcity on the planet, but also scarcity of resources, right? That among
Yeah. And I mean, which pulls us back into the international. That one of the also the looming threats is the threat of a massive war, of invasion, the invasion of Venezuela, the threats now against Cuba, the bombing of civilian boats, civilians in waters off Venezuela, uh, situation throughout the continent of Africa. So, and of course, the continuing suffering in Haiti and the Congo. So many places on the planet that we need to pay attention to, be in solidarity with, that we are all connected and interdependent, the humans and non-human life on this planet.
One,
I think, yep, you want to
if
have a
I could
last?
just give one
Yes,
plug around this labor question. So I
yes,
think this labor question is huge because what the tech billionaires are doing could radically reorganize how work happens,
yes,
right? With
absolutely.
the laying people off, computers that build, I mean, robots that build robots, that kind of thing has major implications for many of us in our communities. And also this administration, we've seen them, lay off 250,000 Black women,
Mhm.
fire, shut down this department, break down that thing.
Yeah.
So this question of, labor, work, value, all of those things are really alive right now and are contested, right? We get to fight for what's to come. I want to point to two important efforts. One is there's a coalition called Mayday Strong, which is a national coalition made up of traditional labor forces as well as community organizations who are coming together with the recognition that we actually need to stop these billionaires, right, and their corporations because they're playing a key role in ushering in authoritarianism. And so there's a critical organizing opportunity for traditional labor and community organizing, social justice organizations to come together. And I think we have to really rise to meet that moment because we're facing a common enemy. And it's our job as organizers and historical actors to help people see that and be active around that. The other thing I wanted to point to is all of the other work of folks who are organizing around labor issues that don't happen in, the quote unquote traditional labor spaces. So I think like NDWA is on the call. So shout out
Yeah.
to the National Domestic Workers Alliance. There's folks who organize that organization. There's folks who organize folks who do sex work. There are folks who are thinking about the care economy and other types of things. And I think all of that work is really critical because, as I mentioned, the question of work and labor are being renegotiated right now, and we need to build enough power to answer them.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We could keep talking. I mean, there's so much uh, thoughtful, passionate brilliance in this call. I really appreciate it. There was a lot of love in the chat, a lot of gratitude and appreciation in the chat. And we're taking, I mean, these are hard questions. So we offer what we have to offer humbly, and we're all smarter together. So we will figure it out together. I wanted to just add another layer to the fronts of organizing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but something I've been thinking about here in Chicago quite a bit, and also looking at what's happening in Minneapolis, how local officials are responding and how certain progressive people are being pushed to be more than progressive because of the, situation on the ground and what they're being confronted with. We have a very progressive mayor here in Chicago. We also have Zohran Mamdani in New York. So we need to think about, municipal radicalism. I mean, there are lessons from other parts of the world in terms of this, Latin America, Europe, parts of the African continent. What is radical? What does it mean to do work on the ground where we build relationships, have local organizations, and to, M's point about M4BL's strategy of care centers. This is where we live. We don't live in national events. We live in a local place. And so how do we put pressure on people with power, on, socialists and progressives in city councils, on progressive and radical mayors, to push back against this, you know, onslaught of fascism coming from the federal government. So that is to be taken up going forward. I wanted to thank everyone again for being on this call. We are at time. I know Freedom February will continue. People who are on the 40 groups that are having events, I think it's probably listed on the website of M4BL. We want to encourage other people who are part of groups to host events. This is not this. We want this to proliferate. We don't want to hold it or control it. On February 19th, the same time, there'll be another panel on abolition in particular with Andrea Ritchie and Rachel Herzing, and I think Ruthie Gilmore is also invited, and someone from the Jericho movement. So that will be another panel that people can tune into. Hopefully, this one will be archived. We raised more questions than we could answer, but I think I really appreciate what you all thoughtfully shared from the head and the heart. A lot more work to do. Glad to be in this struggle with y'all, and have a good rest of your evening.
Bye.